Hello, everyone. Welcome to MBTV. Damon here, and I'm going to introduce some very special guests and our regular host. Obviously, we have Daniel, and we have Trey, and myself, and we also have Nick, and he prefers ISTP, and we have Matteo, who prefers ENTJ. We're going to go into, all you saw was his hand, I think, but he'll pop in just a second. And we're going to kind of go into the exploration of type, try to eliminate some type biases, look at some characteristics. Both Nick and Matteo are new to MBTI, so we'll make it a fun experience. Hopefully, they'll get something from it. Hopefully, we'll get something from it, some insight, and get some really good content out to you guys today. So that's our objective. Let's get started. And Daniel, if you want to kick it off, introduce your guest and kind of your relationship with them, and then we'll go into detail.
Sure. So I've known Matteo pretty much over like a year and a half, I'd say, professionally, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I actually met him through a place of business I used to work at, and ever since that, we actually kind of connected. We are very purposeful together, and we kind of have a very interesting dynamic when it comes to getting things done, to just kind of like spiritual exploration and personal growth. And he's always fascinated with our conversations. He's always interested in what I have to say, which is, I guess, not a commonality. So this is going to be a really cool talk for him because he gets to explore, personality stuff with people who actually, care for the same topic. And I just met Nick today. He prefers a lot of ISTP tendencies, and he's kind of set on that. And we're going to, I guess, take a look at him and their backgrounds and kind of start off in that direction.
All right, guys. So, Nick, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you may think you prefer ISTP and how you related to it and kind of your experience thus far.
Well, I just started really learning about this today, so I'm not really too sure yet. But what were we talking about earlier?
MBTI.
Yeah. No, but I mean like the
intuition.
Yeah.
How you work. Yeah, you're more introverted than extroverted.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have established that he's an introvert, and he resonates a lot with introverted thinking. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about, why you gravitated towards ISTP with the introvert thing. I'll help you along with the functions if you.
I remember what we were saying before.
We talked a lot about the introverted thinking as far as your framework, right, of thinking, and that you prefer. So let's backtrack. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about
Yourself.
Yourself pretty much. Let's focus on that, and we'll go from there.
Well, from what we were kind of breaking down before, I am 22. Not really sure where I'm going in life yet. Had a couple different jobs, and I'm still trying to find exactly what I want to do. I don't know. I'm more hands-on kind of person. I'm very helpful. I give more than I should, and I should be a little more selfish when it comes to myself and doing things for myself.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Pretty much the start.
All right. And Matteo, I think we could see you when you pop up on the main screen. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm 22. I'm turning 23 in December. From New York. We live in a pretty good area. I was raised up by two parents who didn't come from this country, which kind of gives me a little bit more drive and kind of pushes me forward. I find myself more extroverted in the sense as I'm like, I'm more out there. I like to talk to people. I don't really keep stuff, whatever kind of comes to my head. I'm very blunt and open, straight to the point. I don't like, just kind of going behind. I like to just get straight, figure out what's right and wrong. There's no really in between and just go. Usually it makes a little stubborn, makes me seem a little stubborn, specifically with, relationships. I'm working with that. I actually just recently talked to him about that. My girlfriend's an ESTP.
Yeah.
And, at first, I just recently started learning this from Dan. He's kind of explained it to me a little bit more, and I've been able to kind of get the concept. I kind of see myself more as an ENTJ, but today when I saw the link, the little picture that you sent Dan about the two ESTPs, the ESTPs and the ENTJs, I saw some things that resonated with the ESTP, but I think at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, specifically the last bold statement where it says, what really stuck with me is that how you can use your senses specifically in a quick reaction and kind of work with that and be able to make your decision in the right way, which I kind of liked a lot. Let's see, what else is there about me? Jeez. Oh yeah, I'm very scheduled. I'm very organized. I'm very timely. I really have a really bad, not a temper, but kind of, I don't like it when thing doesn't go as planned in my head, because in my head, I already thought out the best ways and I already have a good idea in my head how it should be done and what it should be done. So unless your idea is really mind blowing and I personally can find some sort of reasoning and actual valuable information from it, I'm going to be pretty set on going my way. Time oriented wise, gym oriented wise, my house, I keep pretty much everything organized specifically by shirt type, color. My closet is organized from lights to darks and the types of shirts and how I would use them in what senses. I tend to just be like very OCD clean. My father was very strict growing up, very militant-like, and my mother was always very OCD. She would always give it to me, but I definitely got more of the ENTJ factor from my father. He's a very commanding, straight to the point guy, no bullshit, says whatever he wants, and that's pretty much it. That's probably a good little background knowledge on me.
Sure. Perfect. Okay. And all right, so we get this this type dynamic. Obviously, I prefer ENTJ as well. We've been doing these type kind of work in MBTI for quite some time. Since you're new to MBTI, you know what our drive is trying to eliminate a lot of behavioral biases and really getting down to what the type preference really is. So a lot of times we have what we call individual facets, things that move us into different directions. We've got things that pull us in the sensing direction. We got things that pull us in the intuiting direction. And so with that being said, you're going to see a lot of the sensing facets. You'll see a lot of the intuition facets for people who prefer ESTP. There's a lot of variations on type, and Myers and Briggs called these personal variations. Okay, so a lot of personal variations. In the step 2, what we call form Q, you can kind of see how these personal variations influence you to make you different than a textbook description of the type profile. So you may read something that goes, that doesn't quite sound like me, but at the same time, you overall prefer a certain type over another. Now, the image I sent you guys earlier, that was just one thing that contributes to overall type. Type is a lifelong journey, and you really get to realize, okay, do I really prefer this, or was I taught this? Was I educated this? Is this a role I had to play, or is this a natural preference? And that's what one of the areas in which we struggle with finding type is because we've been taught so many things to do. For example, my natural inclination is intuition, but yet being in business, you got to look at a lot of data, you got to look at a lot of facts, you got to get into the information of what's practical, what's not. That TE obviously helps a lot with that extroverted thinking, but then on the other side, you have to have that practical twist, and you start eliminating a lot of the theoretical stuff and just seeing what works. So there's a lot of aspect of that, and business has taught me that to use that effectively. Is that my natural inclination? No. But it's something that I've learned. So there's that facet, but it doesn't mean that the core type really ever changes. So what we're really looking at when you explore your type is what your type really is at a natural level, not what role you have to play, not what your work requires you to do, not a different hat you wear, not the person you have to be with your girlfriend, not the different persona you have to put on, but exactly who you are at the core. And so if we look at the type preferences, we've got to break them down into basic preference pairs. And you look at E versus I, N versus S, you've got your feeling versus thinking, and you've got your judging versus perceiving. E versus I is extroversion versus introversion, and N versus S is intuition versus sensing. Now we're going to see these facets appear, all of them, because we do use all these functions in a limited scope or in a full scope, depending on what our preferences are. Think of it like a left hand versus right hand type of thing. We can learn how to use the non-preferred hand, but we still have a natural preference for the preferred hand. And now let's say you stopped using your preferred hand for a long period of time and you started using your non-preferred hand. You still have that hard wiring for the preferred hand. So if you were to start using it again, you would notice it would probably start learning faster and start picking up the skills and abilities faster than your other hand learned. And so you'll see that kind of variation. Well, if you take that same kind of principle and you move it into typology, that's how it is with the cognitive functions. The best way to come across type, at least in the sense of Myers-Briggs, is to really look at the preference pairs, E versus I, S versus N, T versus F, and J versus P. And that's where, you know, you go, okay, that's the way I am, but is that how I want to be? Is that how I prefer to be? And when once we look at those preferences, you start seeing, okay, yeah, I've learned to do this role, but is that how I naturally want to be? Is that how I naturally prefer to be? So that being said, Nick, let's focus on you. So let's zoom in on Nick real quick. Let's make sure we get him to fill up the whole screen. I'm just kidding, Nick. Just messing with you.
I'm just getting excited.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to get him. Nick, just a quick question for you is, that being said, you mentioned that you really want to help people and you make decisions off of, you know, that you probably shouldn't make.
Yeah.
That sounds like you're making decisions off of a feeling-based center. Tell me about that, and let me see why you really think you prefer thinking over feeling. Not that I'm saying you are ISFP or anything. I want to know what makes you think you prefer thinking over feeling when you demonstrated that you make decisions that you probably shouldn't make based on, you know, helping people out. So can you tell me a little more about that?
Well, not really sure why I do that, but I definitely make more impulse decisions about everything than thinking clearly and thinking if I should really do something. It's, you know, it's very impulse based. I don't know. I just started learning all this today. So
let me ask you this. Thinking and feeling, I'm gonna clarify this for you. Thinking is not I think, and feeling is not that I'm emotional. Okay, so let's remove that bias. Okay. Feeling is a place of human idiosyncratic data. Okay, so human data. Okay, so when you look at somebody and you go, hey, that person's worth $10. I've just made some personal information and I turned it impersonal. You see what now, somebody who prefers feeling may go, well, that's kind of unfair. You can't put that kind of value on their life, right?
Yeah.
So that's a feeling versus thinking. Very simplified example of kind of what thinking naturally does. It takes human data and depersonalizes it. Okay, that's the negative side of thinking, is we look at people and we tend to depersonalize, take the human element out of decision making. You know, as a thinker. So when you're making a decision, here's your logical pros and cons, and now we're going to remove the human element because it distorts what the best decision is. Now that's an extreme example. Naturally, we learn to use these functions in a way to where we're actually using both and we're incorporating both into decision making, but we're looking at that natural preference, right? What comes to us most naturally? And that's where you really identify, okay, feeling is not me being emotional. It's not me making emotional decisions. That to me is an area of further need of development if you're making emotional decisions, but there's nothing wrong or immature about making feeling-based decisions. In fact, it's warranted and necessary in today's society. Okay, so we want to make sure we remove that bias and we understand that feeling is making decisions off of human data. So if you have, for example, the definition of fair, you take the definition of fair, which is, okay, I think fair as a person who prefers thinking, my natural inclination to think what is fair is all things considered, everyone is treated equally, regardless of, you know, their standing, regardless if they have kids or not. You know, it's like justice over mercy. If they commit the crime, they get executed. I don't care what the circumstances is. If you're female, male, you know, a point that's reasonable. Obviously, if you're a little kid, there's a different thing. That's a human thing being incorporated there. Now, if it was pure thinking, we wouldn't even care if it was a kid or not, right? So you have to incorporate that kind of morality into your decision making, and that's a feeling function being played into morality. The ISTP ultimately prefers thinking so far above feeling that feeling is repressed. Generally, they're removed from feeling in general, especially in younger years, to where they seem cold and aloof. Okay, so the ISTP is known to have this cold and aloofness to their personality. It doesn't mean that you're not ISTP. It just implies that since the feeling is so inferior, their method of approaching the world is primarily logical, that they tend to ignore feeling-based decisions in general and human data in general. Okay, so we have to consider if that sounds like you, then you do prefer ISTP, at least the thinking side.
Yeah.
If it doesn't sound like you go, you know what? I don't know if that sounds like me. Then we have to explore it further. Does that make sense?
No, I think it does explain me though.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of being removed from the feeling element.
Yeah.
Okay. And could you elaborate on that? Tell me a little bit about what that means to you. Because earlier, like I said, you exemplified, I make decisions I shouldn't. So what is that? Is that more of an emotional pull? Is that like, what does that mean to you? Like,
I think it's more of just like, you know, somebody calls me to do something and I don't have anything else going on. So, or maybe I have something that I feel is less important going on that I feel like I can blow off, and I'll make a decision to do something else when I probably shouldn't, and I probably should be doing what I originally had planned, you know, or putting things off that are important to do with me to help someone else, you know. I definitely see myself doing that a lot.
Okay. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this call too, I think, is it's important to understand that sometimes you may make decisions on things that aren't necessarily incorporating any data, and you're just choosing priority. Okay, this sounds like a better idea, or this sounds more fun than something else. And this is what we call the perceiving side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we have to really kind of understand that dichotomy, as well as understanding that, okay, I prefer to act in the moment and not really stick to my plans as scheduled. Yeah. Right. I kind of want to fluctuate. I want to see how I feel in a given mood or time. But so I just wanted to clarify that for our audience and let them know that, hey, just because somebody says something like that doesn't mean that they prefer a certain thing. Right. That we have tendencies that are associated with type. We have tendencies that are associated with type. For example, you have certain functions that are going to be displayed. It's pretty easy to recognize extroverted functions because you can kind of see them clear as day. So, you know, you can see TE or FE or SE. You can see those things. You can see those kind of things kind of interacting in a day-to-day basis. It's harder to see the introverted functions naturally because they're directed inward. So a lot of people are going to have a difficult time doing that. So, Nick, would you say it's fair that you can't really see your logical side sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like people, when I say something, kind of look at me like I have two heads sometimes. And, you know, probably in their head, they're probably saying, why is he thinking that way, you know, or, you know, where did that come from? But, you know, in my head, there is logic behind it.
Perfect. Yeah. And you pretty much got it well reasoned out then, right?
Yeah.
All right. Let's bounce over to Matteo. Matteo, I'm ready to bit. Let's dive in. You put him front and center. Let's get him blown up in the middle of the screen.
Yeah, he's ready.
All right, Matteo, how long have you studied MBTI?
I probably wouldn't say I really even studied, but I'd probably say nothing really at all. I mean, I've kind of talked about it like here and there, kind of got like a little idea, but I don't really fully know everything. But one thing I do really enjoy out of it is that as Dan kind of tells me little bits and pieces, it kind of helps me realize about some things that stick with me. And I think that's what really captivated and kind of got me caught. The learning that's like, although it is based into like, you know, 16 different types and like the whole thing, that even if you look into it, you can kind of see stuff and be like, oh, wow, this kind of resonates with me. Like, this kind of makes sense. I kind of do stuff like this. And so that's one thing that kind of caught me pretty cool about the whole MBTI thing.
Right. And the key is there's two different aspects of MBTI that we really got to really kind of understand too. Is there's the theoretical side, which is the cognitive functions, and there's also the categorical side, which is the typology portion. Okay, so if we can actually learn to differentiate 16 different preference pairs and differentiate that from functions, because type dynamics is the theory used to support the efficacy and the validity of typology. But the theory isn't really necessary to categorize, right? So if we take the theory out, all of a sudden we're seeing type profiles. This person prefers extroversion or introversion, sensing or intuition, feeling or thinking, and judging and perceiving. So you can actually apply a very bold label to people and just say, okay, that's what that person prefers, right? We take the functions out of it because the functions is the theory, and then you have the actual hardcore typology. Is this extroversion or introversion? You can start seeing the facets there and how they kind of interplay in your life. Now, where the challenge is there's also the Barnum effect, right? We have this particular thing that everything is in a way kind of vague to where people feel that it's like you can read it and kind of confirm. Okay, that sounds like it's so general that it sounds like it could be you, right? This person is very scheduled. That could be like a million people, right?
Of course. No, of course.
Yeah. So, you know, I have a particular person that, you know, demonstrated a lot of different traits from a lot of different types. But at the end of the day, you got to find the type that closely resonates you, that most closely resonates your particular personality traits. And that's the key, is kind of realizing it and picturing it like a 16, you know, 16-point grid, a 4x4. And if you go, okay, I'm a random dot and I'm going to be, you know, in this location, I'm closest to this type. but I may demonstrate some tendencies along this type.
Gotcha.
One thing that's interesting is if you look at Socionics, which is another theory of type. Okay, so you have Socionics, you have MBTI. They're two different theories. Socionics is a lot more flexible because it's open. MBTI is a really closed system. They're really particular about their way they present information. Socionics is much more open. Socionics has quadras, and quadras are going to types in certain quadras. So if you position it in quadras, you're going to see, okay, these people share the 4 same functions, so they're going to be very similar to each other in general. Okay, and you're going to see little similarities between these types. And you know, the ENTJ, the INTJ, the ISFP, and the ESFP are in the same quadrant. Okay, so there are going to be similarities between those types that other types may not have. And so, you know, if you look at the alpha quadra or the beta quadra or the gamma quadra, which is what ENTJs are, and then you have the delta quadra. And we're going to be talking about this in the live stream tomorrow. There's going to be a live stream tomorrow night. We're going to go over the quadras, and we're going to have another special guest on that really is familiar with how the quadras are. But ultimately, Socionics is very, very big on talking about how the quadras are actually closer to each other than even the types individually. And that kind of what I like about that is it gives a nebulous feel to understand that you are not like everybody else in the same box. You're going to have and you're going to have the individual differentiation. I mean, obviously, you had a militant father. Anybody's going to appear like a J type with a militant father, right? If you have
of course.
Yeah, you're going to have a dad that's going to whoop your ass, basically. If you don't, you're going to look like a J type, you know, and that's where you're going to like, okay, I have these facets. I've learned to do these things over a period of time, but is it the way I was naturally? You have to think back and go, no, that's not the way I was naturally, right? I was this or that. And that's where we have to really get back to what that core type is. You know, if it were up to me and I had no one or nothing to answer to, how would I naturally be? Right? Because in school, you have the rule breakers, the people who hated every rule. That's often your ESTPs, often the NTJs. You know, then you have the people who follow rules because they're the right thing to do. Then you have the people who naturally kind of vary of this, and then all of a sudden we learn something that actually works more effectively. I probably should do that because it's more effective with whatever I believe or align with. And so you're going to start having variations. One thing I don't like about the typology sector is the fact that we have this stigma that everyone is operating in their preference 100% of the time, right? And we also have the stigma that no one develops, no one learns. ENTJs are cold.
Either end of the spectrum. Gotcha.
Yeah, ENTJs are cold and ruthless, and they'll never learn to be any different. I hate ENTJs. You know, and have that stigma that's associated with the type. And if we assume that, you know, we're in that kind of category, all of a sudden, you know, what the heck is even the point of learning your type if you can't grow or change? Right. The thing I like about MBTI, the last point I'm going to make is that MBTI starts out and specifically says that understanding where your type is your starting point, and then you grow and expand from there. Okay, so that's where we're kind of understanding where our starting point is, and then trying to grow and expand. And ultimately, how do I stretch to introversion? How do I stretch to sensing? How do I stretch to thinking or feeling? You know, in your case, feeling. And how do I stretch to perceiving? Right? And there's going to be that aspect. How do I make those stretches? That's where the theory comes in, and you start looking at the functions. Do the functions show accuracy? Well, the functions are kind of pseudoscience right now, which means there's no actual empirical scientific research on the functions, but there's a lot of observation and saying, okay, I can see that. But again, there's that Barnum effect. It kind of looks like a certain thing.
It's general enough and vague enough where you can kind of just link up to it. And
yeah, the closest thing is running EEGs and Dario Nardi's research and seeing how the functions are operating, processes are operating in the brain. What he realized is you put enough people on EEGs that prefer a certain type, you start seeing the same patterns. Okay. That's the closest we've got into actually the functions. But the functions have been around since Carl Jung. That's a long time ago. So they've been around for a while, but there's no way to prove it yet. So it is pseudoscience. A lot of people are like, well, you should never listen to MBTI, but it's pseudoscience. Yeah, maybe you're right. You know, maybe it is pseudoscience. But you know what? It allows you to be aware of what the heck you're doing. First off, it gives you some leverage. And I say use it for what it is. Let's not try to make it for what it's not, right? Let's try to understand that MBTI is one small component of understanding our total personality profile. It's a small component. It's cognition. On the other hand, you got Enneagram. That's more of instincts. And Trey's obviously getting more and more informed on Enneagram and how it works. We have a lot of discussions. Trey corrects me quite a bit when I make an issue or a statement about Enneagram that may not be as accurate as he had hoped. So he's been studying up on Enneagram and making sure that, I'm correct as far as my Enneagram knowledge, and also his own Enneagram knowledge as well. So there's that aspect that's involved in typology too. And really, it's just a pursuit of finding out more information about yourself, right? I don't see anything wrong with astrology. I don't think maybe astrology is fake, maybe it's not real, maybe whatever, answer certain questions, get a certain result, whatever. But at least you're getting enough information and being aware, oh yeah, you know what? I do that. And that's all that you need. Right. So it's the same kind of thing, except MBTI is a lot more research than astrology. It is a lot more rooted in a lot of science as far as the typology side of it, not so much the function side. There's research as far as that goes, but it's not really clear yet. And I'm hoping that we'll have some breakthroughs. Anyway, all that rant aside, that was a long rant. Matteo, the perspective of ENTJ, what really stood out to you? And then how has that resonated in your life? And what struggles have you had?
Struggles, what do you mean by struggles? Like with characterizing myself, or just any struggles with my life in general?
With your life, relationships, people, what kind of things have you had? What struggles
all right, so I can start off with struggles. I'll get out my weak points first, just to get those out. I feel like one of my biggest main points is that I don't connect to a lot of people, specifically like my girlfriend, other people just in general in my life in an emotional level. For me, everything is either black or white. There's a right and a wrong, and most of the time I have the right answer. So I usually don't I always get a little tension at times where sometimes someone will go against the grain and they'll try to not follow my schedule. I think another thing that's wrong with me is that I get a little too overly upset when stuff doesn't go my way, specifically time schedule, or if I have something set in my head, that's because I know in my head that that's how I want to do it. Struggle wise, I think some things that helped me become the person I am is my parents, I told you a little bit about it, but my parents got divorced when I was younger. I was around, I'd say 9, 10. So I was young enough where I don't remember that well, but I was old enough where I realized what was going on. So I feel like that definitely impacted a lot in my views and relationships and how I open and connect to people. Me as myself, I don't really, how I see it is I don't have a lot of friends, but I have a lot of acquaintances. I know a lot of people. I like knowing people, but I don't just let anybody just you can be an acquaintance of me. We could be mutual friends, but I don't think of you as part of my life unless you're bringing something useful to the table.
Basically,
if you're bringing, no, we're friends. No, you're good. You got the pass already. So I usually, so I kind of feel like that stays with me, and I feel like that's definitely impacted a lot growing up. And my mother's been always OCD clean. My father, once again, he's very militant, so I've always had the everything has to go this way, and if everything's set and done perfectly, and there's no problems, nothing's going to go wrong. And that's why in my head, when I don't do what I want to do or it doesn't go my way, I automatically think it's wrong. Just from my upbringing, I've always had straight one road, it's going to be the best route. You got to think about it, but make sure your options are there. Now, I think one of my main things I really do have to work on more is kind of being able to express my emotions, even though I don't really want to. That's kind of more of my girlfriend, me trying to grow as a person. Because I feel like if I'm not able to kind of express all my emotions and be able to kind of tap into every part of me, I really wouldn't be able to have a whole well-rounded knowledge of who I am and how I could better myself and prevent, from worsening myself. Mm-hmm. So I guess that kind of hits struggles. Now, what was the other question?
Oh, how do you?
So one thing that that really stuck with me was once again, it's all thinking, how you said, it's all thinking. Pretty much, you think it out. It's pretty simple. There's the right and wrong. And one thing that really stuck with me is the whole leadership. With the ENTJ, I realized that whenever I'm with my friends or groups, it's not that I try to be assertive and dominant in a sense, but it kind of just happens, and everyone kind of just follows my sense of route, and they have a good general idea that it's let's say we go out if we go out, my friends are going to follow me and they're just going to be like, they're going to follow me and they'll be like, all right, what are we doing? What's the plan, Matteo? They can always count on me to have something set up in worst case scenario. I'm not going to go in exact details, but when stuff hasn't gone the way that I'd like to, I've already in my head thought of the multiple situations and the outcomes. So when something does happen that's unexpected, I already have an answer. So I already like to have something already set in stone that I already have like a good idea, kind of just make sure everything still stays with my agenda in particular.
Okay. And so let's talk about that, how you predict those outcomes. Kind of what goes through your mind? How do you expect those outcomes to unfold? Is it experience? Is it, you've been in these situations a lot? How do you come to those understanding what's going to happen? Like you said, if something happens, I already have a contingency plan for it. So tell me about that.
Well, kind of how I think of it, like I think too in depth into things and stuff, and I think too logistically, and I think too logical, and that happens with me. But I personally would say, I'd have to say my thoughts kind of come and then let's say a situation happens, I quickly run it by my head, I put it, and then stuff comes back. Something's gonna happen, and then once something happens, kind of stuff circulates in my head, and one thing matches with another thing that has happened, and it's kind of like, if you remember monkey in the barrels, you put the monkey and you get one monkey in the barrel and it'd come out, and then it just constantly keep linking up in a bigger and bigger chain. Yeah. I feel like in my state of mind, when something happens, it kind of just all becomes into a chain of events and brings back stuff that I may not think is there right away, but it kind of, not from experiences, but from stuff that has happened. So I guess in a sense, experiences, but from there you kind of, personally, I kind of always weigh out my options. There's always, there's the right way and the wrong way, but even though if there's the right way and the wrong way, there's still other options. What's my right way is still going to be my right way, but it doesn't say there's other options to do it. I just personally think that my way is the right way.
Right. Okay. And so when you're predicting outcomes, one of the things I'm analyzing here is I'm looking at your sense of intuition and sensing. And so I'm looking at how you're using this in your personality. And this goes to show you how your type dynamics come to play. If we look at this from the theoretical side and say, okay, what we're doing to come up with these particular predictions, right? How we're coming to these abstractions, how we're getting to these points. It really shows that how type plays a role into our personality. We use all 8 functions. And that's where we got to say, okay, is that a natural tendency for me? Is that naturally what I like to do? I may be using this particular function. There's times when you use functions when that may be out of preference. And so our goal is to really identify what functions we're using. So we create that self-awareness and go, okay, in this situation, I've used this particular function. In this situation, I've used this particular function. So one of the things that we see is these functions kind of interplaying, especially when they're extroverted. We can see them in other people, but when they're introverted, you can see them operating in yourself. And so one of the things I was like, we're analyzing how sensing and intuition play a role in your personality, hopefully so you can see, okay, I see it now at this point I'm using sensing, or at this point I'm using intuition. Can you give us some examples that you've used intuition in your life?
I'm trying to think of like a good, so, all right, how about this? Let me ask you, can you give me an example so I have kind of like a sideline, like a basis, like what would your sense of thinking intuitionally be and thinking with, it's intuition, what is that? Sensing. And sensing. Well, from what I got into sensing is more of your environmental feel. So like, let's say if an environmental, with sensing, how I see it and how I've kind of grasped it is, if I get put into this situation, I'm going to be looking around everything and like, my senses as in like my feel, whatever I hear, that's kind of what I'm going to resonate and make my own thing. Now, when I think of intuition, I kind of personally think of like a conscious, the little voice in your head that like kind of rewinds it, the good and the bad, the angel and the devil. I kind of see it more as like kind of like you have to like, you already have something in your head, but it's pretty much like being able to use the facts and the data that you already know to get the final result. So I don't know if that's exactly intuition to an exact sense. So I'd pretty much, that's why I'm asking, like, if you can explain a little bit more, that could probably give you a better.
If we look at sensing in general, what sensing is a perception function. It's how we take in information. And so is intuition. They're both information gathering functions. Okay. When we look at them in the extroverted sense, we see the external world. This is the external world as is, right? And it's not about hearing everything and seeing everything, because I guarantee you, everybody who prefers ESTP or ESFP isn't so sensory aware.
I can't really hear you too much. I think
Hey, can you mute your microphone? Okay. Anyway, so one of the things we got to understand is that when we look at sensing, it's a sensory thing from the extroverted standpoint. But it's not only a sensory thing from the extroverted standpoint. Extroverted sensing is also about force. It's also about application of force, how we use force, and being grounded in reality. Right here, we are present, this minute, and it's not about strength. Okay, we have to remember that typology isn't about the strength of functions unless you start going into socionics. Then it talks about strength of functions a little more. But as far as sensing in itself, you can prefer sensing and actually suck at it. Okay, so there's that aspect too. So you can prefer sensing and still be horrible at it and actually be better with intuition, yet prefer sensing overall. You just may not. That's not likely though, because you prefer it, you'll be using it more and it'll naturally develop. But sometimes that's repressed by society, the environment, your family. I mean, if you have a militant dad and you're a ISFP, that's going to be hell for you.
Right?
Yeah. And so that's going to really repress probably a lot of development in a way. So it's about having the right environmental factors that contribute to growth. But again, if we look at sensing, and let's go back to the point, extroverted sensing is awareness here now and using the application of force. Introverted sensing is much different. It's the subjective experience that's given by sensory experience, and it creates archetypes, processes. It's more hierarchical in its formation. It's more archetypal in its formation. So you look at things like introverted sensing, and it's about creating archetypes of patterns that have resulted in the past, sequential patterning from one step to the next, to the next step, to the next step. When you like specifically how you came to your prediction, you demonstrated that you at least explained it in a way that sounded like introverted sensing. You were comparing things to, here's the keywords that I heard. And like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I was hearing was introverted sensing and extroverted intuition. And you said, I predict what could happen, but I look at my experience, this is what happened, and my own impression of those experiences, and then I can predict what is the reliable outcome. That sounds like introverted sensing and extroverted intuition.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's a you can see those dichotomies. Doesn't mean you prefer it. That just sounds like the axes, because those two come kind of as a package deal. You get one, you get the other. All right. So whereas the other one is much different. So let's talk about intuition for a second. Intuition is less about the five senses and more about what's in between the lines. Okay. Everybody uses it. Let's hope everybody uses it. Otherwise, you're missing.
Yeah.
But everybody uses it, and so intuition is about future-oriented, future possibilities, big picture focus, calculating potential outcomes of the future, regardless of introverted or extroverted intuition. You can calculate potential outcomes. You're looking at what's in between the lines, the meaning behind data. You're less data focused in general if you prefer intuition. You remember specifics for how they relate to a pattern. Intuition is about what's the meaning behind something. What does this particular impression mean? Okay, so those are aspects of sensing and intuition that's a little bit different. Intuition is looking at what's not there. Sensing is looking at what's there. Now, if you add the extroverted slant and the introverted attitude to it, you get two different things. The extroverted attitude adds an external objective view of intuition. What is the connection between these two things? Transcontextual thinking. I can take this particular possibility and this particular possibility or this particular possibility and see how they all interconnect. Okay, how do these things what are the potential outcomes from this situation? So when we look at a problem, for example, when we look at the extroverted angle, here's a problem presented on our plate. What could it become? It could become this. That's an example of extroverted intuition. It could potentially be this problem. Or looking at current trends is an example of using extroverted intuition. Here's a trend. Here's where it may go. It may go this way. It may go that way. It's very emergent. It takes a single point, not explodes to a million ideas, but finding the connection between things, and it tends to want to connect everything and have this interrelationship between all things. if it's preferred in your personality. As it's minimized, it's used in more of the limited scope. So introverted intuition, on the other hand, does this in the mind. Okay, so abstractions are released in the mind, and they're usually released by a sensory impetus. Hence why people who prefer intuition or introverted intuition are generally very distracted. And I don't mean distracted as in scattered, I mean distracted by their impressions, because their impressions can be so strong and they're so confident in a prediction that they see something so clearly that it's very different from how extroverted intuition works. When you're looking at all the connections, it's very rapid and fast firing. The introverted intuition is a slower process, but when the connection is made, it's made usually unconsciously, and you may be looking at something very simple, and all of a sudden an insight is released, and it's like an aha moment. And it happens, more preferred it is, probably the more frequent it's going to happen in your personality. But they're hit with insights all the time. Trey is a dominant introverted intuitive. Trey, would you actually share what that experience is like for you? And then I'll share you how I use it in some ways, and then maybe you can give us some more detail on the question I asked earlier. So Trey, would you?
Yeah, no, I love that.
All right. Yeah. So basically, for me as a dominant introvert intuitive, it's like a whole other world. It's like I don't even see half the world around me, because everything in my head is like I'll notice one or two things, and then it'll cause this big thought, and then I'll just start thinking about that for like forever. And it's what it is over time I've built up like a abstract understanding of reality. So it's actually, Michael Pierce put it like this: you have concrete reality, which is extroverted sensing, and all of the information that you get from concrete reality goes into abstract interpretation, introverted intuition. So when I look at the world around me, it's not what I'm actually seeing. It's not just surface level, or like, well, I don't mean surface level like that. I just mean it's not what it actually is in concrete reality. It's this abstract interpretation of it. So a lot of times I'll get disgusted by things that seem normal to a lot of other people, because I'm just like, it's just horrendous. And like, I get all these pictures in my head of like all these horrendous, like grimy, slimy, disgusting things. And like, people are like, what? Normal, And so what happens is a lot of the things that I see in my inner world, they're just not the same as what everyone else sees, or what it actually is. It's something that I've picked up over time, because NI is about recognizing patterns. So a lot of those patterns have built up into a whole way of seeing the world. It's a whole abstract view of reality. And so, and it's an interpretation. It's not even abstract reality. That's extrovert intuitives, but. Yeah, so as a dominant introvert intuitive, I mean, man, I'm out of it. I'll look at something and it'll just give me this like huge like insight, and then I start thinking about that, and I'll just be looking over here the whole time, like I'm just looking right here, and I'll just have this huge insight, and I'm thinking, and then that insight caused me to be like, I'd be like, well, I can't answer that question, so like, what it'll do is it'll remind me of something else. Like maybe even the fact that I couldn't answer the question, the way that I couldn't answer the question, will remind me of an entirely different insight. And so I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be doing this one thing. And just the fact that I couldn't answer my insight reminds me of something else and causes this big other thing. And I'm over here now, and I'm like, and then like, I'm supposed to do this one activity. Like I have this one thing to do, but just sitting down, I mean, I use these eventually when I'm talking with people, and like a lot of it has to do with Enneagram and MBTI. It's a big part of some of my insights. So when I'm working with people, it's really helpful because I can pull these out and I can use them, even though like it takes away from a lot of just living life. I can still use what I've got to help others, and that goes into a lot of Enneagram as well. But I won't bore you with that one.
So I'm going to give you a good example. I may be asking Trey for a very simple question, maybe asking him for a very simple explanation of something. And even if his close friends tell me the same thing, it's not just me. I thought it was just me. Like maybe I just kicked him into outer space or something. Because, and it's not that he's just an intuitive, so he actually disconnects from reality quite a bit. And he prefers intuition so much that he actually will disconnect from the sensory experience in general. And people for intuition generally will have this function happen quite a bit, especially in their youth. And so, for example, I was talking to Trey earlier, and it was a very simple question. It was like, hey, did you do this? And he was like, well, you see that I was doing it because... And that's what happens. And
like, I don't even think laughing at the screen agreeing.
yeah, he'll lose the sensory experience to the point where he's not aware of where objects are. He's not aware of where he placed things. He's not aware of what's going on in the environment at all. And I'll be like, hey, Trey, hey. And it's because he's so focused. It's an intense focus, and he's following a very specific pattern. He also speaks in highly metaphorical and pictures. He speaks in pictures. And so as you communicate with him, you can actually see how many metaphors he's using and how much symbolism he's using in his language. Trey uses a lot of metaphorical ways to explain things. If you watch his personal YouTube channel, you can see this. He's always making everything a metaphor. And this is
Sometimes we'll even be talking about something and I'll have an aesthetic. Like I'll think in my head about how it would feel or the temperature. I don't know. It's weird stuff. It'll just be like, all it'll be is like an idea. Like I think we were talking about some stuff earlier, Damon and I were, and what ended up happening was I got this picture of how it would be. And I just blew up on it and expanded it. And in my head, I saw how life would be for an individual in this. If society were based off this idea, how would life be? And I kind of pictured it that way. And I just pictured like how life would be for a normal individual. And I could, it was like a darker blue, and there was certain aesthetics and I had all these pictures, and I kind of wanted to tell him about it. But like anytime I do, he's like, what? So even though he can understand and he can listen and be like, yeah, I can see why you'd say that. It's more about, for him, it's more about practicality at the same time though. So
yeah, it's like, I want to make sure the insights can be applied to some type of goal or objective or some type of thing. So it's like, I have the same kind of mind in the sense of being in an intuitive space, which was demonstrated a little in my teens, where I would start checking out a little bit more. In my youth, I was operationalized and taking in hundreds of data, lots of data in my youth. As a young kid, I was taking as much data as possible. I was gathering factual information on everything from, I read encyclopedias, I read dictionaries, I read everything I could get my hands on as a kid. It was just absorbing as much information in massive quantities as a young kid. And then when I started getting my teens, I started checking out a little more and spacing out, just spaced. And I remember I would like just stare off in a little bit more, and I'd be like, what's going on? I thought I was like, going mentally insane or something. But an example of intuition and how I use it today as a young adult now, 28 years old, I'm actually looking and I'm seeing how intuition is playing a role, and also how sensing is playing a role and how sensing is developing my personality. But specifically, intuition for me is, less like the person who prefers dominant intuition, who has dominant intuition on the top of their functional stack. Intuition to me, I have very similar insights to Trey, but they're used as a tool to drive my agenda. They're not my primary mode of operating. So naturally, if I see an idea or see a trail that has nothing to do with anything, I'm going to discard it. It has to be, my agenda is set, and then I'm gonna have insights constantly. I have a lot of insights. Trey, have seen this too. I predict.
I can agree with you on this. I like that. That was a good way to put it down. I like that.
Yeah, and I predict outcomes in a very different way than you described. I don't think of past. I don't look at the past. The past experiences, I tend to ignore that stuff for the most part. I use the past as a reference point if I need to validate the insight. But as far as the insight itself, it comes from an abstraction. And I gather data that's not really there. So, I will see somebody, and kind of the way that I see people is I'll see a person in front of me, and it's like I can almost like pull data from them, and it's not what I'm seeing. It's not like, hey, this person's wearing this. It's like I get an abstraction, an impression that is set in my mind.
Why is this person wearing this? You kind of start asking more of a why question, or what do you got the sense?
It just comes from, I can't explain it. It's very, from my personal experience, I can't explain. I can explain introverted intuition and how it works, but for my personal experience, I can look at something and I get a piece of data that is almost completely irrelevant to what I actually looked at. So for example, this water bottle I could stare at it one day and it could give me a brand new inspiration about life, about a business idea, about something. And I can do that. And so as I've gotten older, I've learned to do that a little more to kind of build that function and allow my insights to become more clear. But as I've gotten older, in my early 20s, it happened a lot. I could just look at stuff and I'd get these impressions. They just lay like blueprints in my mind. And once I've got all these blueprints, my mind maps them all together. It just pieces everything together. And next thing I know is I can predict outcomes like that. Here's exactly what's going to happen. And I can just predict it. And then I know, and that's what happens. And it's unlike what you described in the way that you described it. You described, I look at what could happen, and then I pull from a database, and I use that database to predict and have contingency plans. That's not exactly how my mind works in that regard. Now, if you explained it in a way that you were trying to say what I'm saying, that's a different thing. But if that's what happens for you, that is more of a SINE thing. I'm explaining NISE, which is introverted intuition with extroverted sensing.
I think kind of when I was trying to sense it is, I think kind of now that I get a little better understanding is because I can agree completely with you on like how I have my mindset. If something comes up, if it has no value or use to me, it's done. I have, it's nothing important to me. Now, the one thing that I'm kind of getting from it is the whole validation. That kind of stuck with me. Now, when I meant by going to past reference, I always like to have I know I'm right, but I like to make sure I'm right. If I'm going to say I'm right, I'd want to make sure it's to the T, everything's there. So I can sense where both parties are. I can definitely see where you're coming from. And I could now I have to do a little bit more thinking about myself, which is kind of what I like about this, kind of why I'm here, just to learn a little bit more about myself. But I see it more as when I do some things kind of more to validate my decision, to make sure that I like to know that I'm not going to fuck up, and I don't like making mistakes, pretty much is what it comes down to.
Right. And we got to look at how your life has played a role into that too. So the key is to really gather is when you look at your type, let's not have biases against one thing versus another thing. In the Myers-Briggs community, I'm going to be not the first to say this, obviously. This is said quite a bit. In the Myers-Briggs community, sensing is looked down on. It's a big mistake.
Why do you say, why do people kind of play it down? Like, what's the reasoning that most people don't like it? Or just not like it, but kind of just,
Here's why. Myers-Briggs it's a theoretical concept. So naturally, it's people who prefer intuition love looking at the abstractions that Myers-Briggs can release. And so it typically, not always, will attract people who have developed intuition. Okay. And so naturally, that's going to be the people who prefer intuition. Now, people who prefer sensing, who have developed their intuition, actually like Myers-Briggs too. So you'll have this aspect, but in general, it's primarily NFs. NFs dominate the Myers-Briggs community. NFs are all over the place when it comes to Myers-Briggs. So you're going to have ENFPs, INFJs, and ENFJs. There are less ENFJs. ENFJs are out hugging people.
Sounds about right.
But INFJs, you're going to have ENFPs, and you're going to have INFPs, and then you might have a sprinkle of ENFJ here and there. But for the most part, you'll have NFs, and then you'll have but less of NTJs, and then you'll have even less of SPs, and at the very least, you'll have SJs. And it's because of their typical cognitive preferences. And it makes sense why they would do that. SJs, like you said again, is I want to make sure my everything is accurate. And SJs are very much, and here's about the sensing bias, which I was going to go into, and I'm not inferring that you're an SJ. I'm saying that this is what I'm noticing, and I'm just helping you realize how these functions interplay in yourself. SJs, they root everything and making sure that everything is concrete. Is this what it actually is? Is this what it actually is? And they're sticklers for proof, in the sense of making sure that there's actual concrete data that supports a conclusion. Okay, they're not really, I'm going to listen to this nebulous conclusion. For example, as someone who prefers ENTJ rather, in my youth, I came across a lot of very, very successful ESTJs. And these particular ESTJs and ISTJs would tell me, you may not want to take that risk. And I'm like, why? And they give me every reason in the world why not to take the risk. And I'm like, okay, well, I get where you're coming from. But I have a gut feeling and I can't control that. Generally, it turns out that I didn't have enough experience and they were right. And so I failed quite a bit. I fell on my face a lot because of that. And I trusted my gut. That's my natural instinct. And so I trusted what came to me most naturally, which was intuition, my insights, and the things that I knew. So I tend to ignore their experience because it wasn't because I believed I was right. I just felt like I had to do it. There was a pull to it, and it was like I saw something in my head. Now, reality, which is what SJs are really good at telling you about, they're the people who go, stop, you're back in reality, shut up, here you are. Like, and they bring you back to earth. And so I struggled a lot because as a younger person who preferred intuition and being a TE dominant, I had this aggression toward the outer world. But in the inner world, I felt like it was so incomplete. It was developing these insights. And I felt very lost for a very long period of time because of the inner world and the insights that I had. And I felt like nobody could really relate to me at all. So I didn't feel like people really understood why I was making a decision. Hence, I discredited a lot of their expertise. And that because I just felt alone. I felt like there was not anybody who could really understand my own insights. And that really specifically happened as I got older. When I was younger, it was like I said, it was all factual. Everything was factual. I didn't spend a lot of time calculating outcomes when I was younger. It was me absorbing massive amounts of information and correcting people. So as a kid, ESTJs and ENTJs will look very similar. You'll see a little bit of differences, but primarily behavior-wise, you'll see a lot of similarities. Majority of the time, you'll see them very similar. The difference you might see is the people who prefer sensing, back to the original point, is it's looked down on because it's seen as superficial, because people in Myers-Briggs community tend to want to look between the lines and go, hey, this is actually what all this means, the meaning of this data. What's the interconnections and what's the relationships? Whereas a sensing person goes, yeah, you just spent like 3 years studying something that didn't help you at all. You just wasted your time. And great, that didn't help you. Now you still don't have a job and you still live with your mom. Bringing you back to reality. That's what they're good with. And it's so sensing people always use a lot of that concrete data to support their arguments. So society in general, not Myers-Briggs community, but society prefers ESTJ as an American society. ESTJ is the abundant, ultimate success figure as far as society is concerned for someone who is successful. They have all the connections, the relationships with people. They present the good aura. They present success. They present the put togetherness. They present the concrete reality, the factual base. It's also considered typically the most associated with masculinity is ESTJ.
So out of
there's a lot of stereotypes.
No, I get that. So out of because I saw like with the ENTJs you had Julius Caesar, and then with ESTP you had Theodore Roosevelt. Now, who would be someone, or a great leader, or someone I guess somewhat influential that you would say would be an ESTJ?
The history is so full. I mean, the majority of people who lead organizations, military organizations, your dad's probably ESTJ. Okay, so I mean, it's like the majority. Okay, so SJs in general take about they're about 30 to 40% of society, and then STJs are about 20%, 20-25%, somewhere in that range. So STJs are pretty abundant in society, and so you'll have a lot of that. Military is full of STJs. I can't name any examples off the top of my head because number one is I don't know if that's their actual type, but
Gotcha.
Number two is that they're pretty much everywhere. So you can think of anything. And for the most part, you're going to find an STJ somewhere, somehow. They're typically called the administrators or managers. That's obviously a stereotype that's put in. But the reason for this is because they see how the logistics of situations that are called the logisticians, they can see how everything lines up and make sure people in the right place at the right time, making sure the resources are being utilized effectively. Very focused on the concrete realities. Okay, so whereas intuitives are a little more space cadets in general. They're more guided by their own vision than they are reality. And so they tend to be a little more space cadets. So sometimes they need to be surrounded by people who prefer sensing because they look, hey, you really only have $5, buddy. Don't go buying that $10,000 boat on credit because you really have $5. Right? And so there's that sensing element that's important. Whereas the intuitive may go, I only have $5 now, but someday I will have the other 9,900. Right? I'm obviously drawing a very stark contrast between the two to show you the difference. As far as these lines that people develop, they get starting to look more and more similar because they get together. But the ESTJs, they're very rooted in things that have worked in the past and what's most effective in the past, and then continuing that. So Kiersey called them the guardians. And because they protect the past archetypal things that have been successful, and they say, you know what, if it works and it's not broken, don't fix it. Whereas intuitives always want to improve things and innovate and make and change and make things better, and in general, of course. Now, ESTJs, as they develop, their third function is intuition, which means they actually will start changing things and making things better. But as they typically, they'll refer on that process, that primary perceiving process, and see the world in a very concrete, sequential way. This is how things work out. This is how it is. It's like the line of the STJ. That's how it is, right? So when your dad probably beat in the philosophy of how you live life, that's probably he probably prefers STJ. Whereas INTJ, there's a lot of stereotypes because a lot of famous people in history were considered INTJs. There's a stereotype that they're these power-hungry visionaries, which they do have vision, and they do have that, like any type has vision. It's not like it's specifically on INTJs, but INTJs also tend to be better strategists and less logisticians. So the details, they tend to be caught up, and they can get easily overwhelmed with details. The details drive them crazy for the most part. In general, naturally, as they develop sensing, that gets easier, but for the most part, naturally speaking, excessive amounts of detail-oriented stuff drains the life out of them. So intuitives naturally will have a little more messier homes, a little more messy of thought processing because they're looking at abstractions. Like I was saying, when I was using NI, I look at a particular thing, and something is released to me, and that insight becomes so attractive that I actually can disconnect from reality too. Right? That insight becomes so attractive, I can follow that insight, and it's like blocks being laid down, and sometimes that insight is the missing piece to the puzzle, and the puzzle goes, everything kind of connects, and I'm like, got it. And then the insight's there, and I'm so driven to that insight, and I'm pushing it toward my agenda, and that's how my insights work. Now, I won't follow a bunny trail that's irrelevant. It generally just, if it's irrelevant, I'm not going to follow it as far as my goals and agenda goes. But if it's connected somehow into my goals, which I've expressed many times about, humanity, morality, education, a lot of the things that I've talked about on previous videos, I will follow those trails to see how everything pieces together. And it all happens in the subject's mind, whereas extroverted intuition happens in reality, connection. So it's very good at calculating potential outcomes and being more ahead of the trends and catching the trends, whereas NI is usually more focused on sequential patterning and the building blocks being laid down to understand how that process flows and seeing, okay, this is for the reason, I'm going to jump into this in the future on my individual type videos, which are going to be released at some point in the future. And you'll see the difference primarily between someone who prefers intuition and someone who prefers, say, thinking, like probably you and I do. You can see the things, how they line up. And so if you look at someone who prefers intuition, generally their primary focus is looking at contingencies and planning around every contingency. And so whereas someone who prefers thinking generally tries to force everything into their one contingency, which is, this is the way and you're going to fit in this way. Okay. So, and if you don't fit in this way, I'm going to make you fit into this way. That's kind of the thinking way, right? Or they may have another contingency plan, a backup plan. But for the most part, that thinking is so driven that it tends to be more hierarchical, whereas the intuition is more contingency planning. For this reason, Kiersey called the INTJ the contending arranger, and he calls the ENTJ the initiating mobilizer. So you have those two aspects and understanding how they do those things. He specifically said the ENTJ is hierarchical and wants to establish structure, and everybody fills that particular role, and then making sure that everybody's pieced into that puzzle correctly and there's no outliers. You shove everything into that system, make that contingency work. Whereas intuition is, okay, this is a possible outcome. Here's the contingency for this. This is a possible outcome, making sure that every sequential element is lined up. It's it's arranging outcomes. Less forceful because SE is inferior, but it's so a lot less force and more about working around arrangements. Now, they can present force. They will if they have to. But working around arrangements and seeing how, okay, here's the outcome. If this happens, I'm going to do this pattern. If this happens, I'm going to do this pattern. if this happens, I'm going to do this pattern. That's more of the INTJ approach. You know, and working closely with an INTJ in business, I was able to witness this quite a bit. You know, seeing him do that. He had a plan for everything. Whereas me, it's like I have one plan and everybody's going to fit into that plan. And if it doesn't fit, I'm not going to be very happy. And that's true for both ESTJ and ENTJ. You know,
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the same across. That part is the same. The TE dominant, and seeing how that works in people, that's very similar. So does that help clear that up a little bit?
No. That definitely did clear it up a little bit more.
Yeah. So there's a lot of concept in this. This is something that we can talk on for quite a while. I'm trying not to ramble on, but I've already talked. Problem with preferring extroversion is airtime.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and so that being said, let's really dive into, you know, getting back into what our functions are and understanding. Okay, we've got these personality types, we've got those things. So I'm going to pull up celebrity types real quick, and just to see what celebrity type said about ESTJ to kind of give you an idea, and I'm going to also help kind of identify what celebrity type says because celebrity types, what they do is they look at people and go, hey, here's some quotes. This person is probably a ESTJ, based on kind of the quotes and the things they say, and maybe they have some other method. But what they do is they support that conclusion through quotes. So if I go through here, here's some Henry Ford, Margaret Thatcher. It says a lot of people think Margaret Thatcher was an ENTJ. There's Hillary Clinton says ESTJ here. Dr. Phil, Condoleezza Rice, Martha Stewart, Michelle Obama, Ann Coulter, Megyn Kelly, Bill O'Reilly. Okay, Bill O'Reilly is a very good example of someone who prefers sensing, as far as I can tell. Primary reason, I don't know if you're familiar with Bill O'Reilly, but
yeah, I have a good general sense.
Yeah, and it's like, no, the facts are this. What are you doing? Stop jumping points. Look at what's happening. And he gets pissed off when people don't agree with him, right? That's a good example of a traditional ESTJ traits. And then the quote here, let's see if he has my weapons are the facts. That's a pretty good quote from ESTJ, is really rooting in that factual data, you know. So, and then here's the kind of a reference to introverted sensing. He said, I believe the United States was well founded and has done enormous good for the world. So he's looking at kind of what had happened in the past. Let's move on to Paul of Tarsus, Billy Graham. You know, we got some Saddam Hussein, they say, is an ESTJ or preferred ESTJ. Tom Clancy, Uma Thurman, Lucy Liu, Emma Watson, some actresses, Kelsey Grammer, Alec Baldwin, Ivanka Trump. The list is ridiculous. It's just the majority of war leaders are either ESTP or ESTJ. Okay, so very much often ESTJ, sometimes ENTJ, depending on that. But ESTP was also very common for war generals for the fact that they're able to adapt, specifically ESTP, primarily because of tactical circumstances. When you look at tactics, ESTPs are called the tacticians, or STPs in general, STs. And then you've got your STJs, which are called, according to Kiersey, they're the logisticians. So you have those different avenues to kind of see how their brains are wired. And under the Kiersey model, people can assume, here's how your brain naturally is. And as you move further and further away from your type, it gets more difficult because your brain's wired in this way. The furthest type from you, you probably shouldn't do it all. That's what their recommendation is. Did he leave? He's probably like, no, screw this. He was like, you know what? I can't handle it. I'm leaving. All right. So that being said, did you get that last part, Matteo?
Which part in particular?
Well, I was just talking about the temperaments, that what Kiersey was relating SJs and STs. So SJs, he called them the logisticians. He said the brain's wired in a very logistical way. He called the STs, no, the SPs, the artisans, and he said they have a tactical mind.
Okay.
Tactics. So we have to, if we understand things in a way of 4 different temperaments, you have the diplomats, you have the tacticians, you have the logisticians, and then you have the strategists. Okay, so that's why you take somebody who prefers strategy, which is like your standard NTs, your rationals, and you try to put them into a point of logistics, and it drains the life out of them. Or you put them in a role of diplomacy, drains the life out of them. Put them in a role of you put them in the role of the tactics, they can do okay because they actually can move to tactics decently, but they still struggle a little bit. That's not their natural preference. They do best with strategy. This is very clear in the way that I've always run businesses as well. For me, is I've always been a strategy person. Daniel gives me way too much details, you know, and it's like, Daniel, I just need the summary. And he's just giving me all this information that I just need the summary of it. Now, he may feel the information is relevant, and it may be my fault for discounting some of the information he's giving me. So being aware of those things is very important. And that's the key, is realizing my brain's not wired that way, but it doesn't mean that information is not important. Every organization needs a bunch of SJs, as far as I'm concerned, or people who have a strong introverted sensing function to keep things in order. That's why Kirsty called them the guardians originally too, is to keep, they protect systems and they keep things going. Too much strategy people creates problems. Too many innovators creates problems, but having enough guardians keeps the structure in still. They keep the structure flowing and moving. And that's the idea of understanding the temperament behind things. So any thoughts on that?
I mean, I can see
Matteo?
I mean, you can go first.
Yeah, no, it's cool because like there's a lot of different routes.
Daniel, I can't hear you at all.
Oh, can you hear me now? Hello?
Still can't hear you.
Hello?
A little bit better. Not much.
Maybe do you have to speak a little louder, maybe?
Why? I can't hear you. You must have different frequency of your voice.
Hello?
You move the thing. Turn it all the way up.
All right, how about now?
Yeah, okay, good. There we go.
Oh, okay. No, that was interesting because even for me, like I didn't really understand the difference between SJs and maybe NJs. I was thinking about that even though like I know Matteo to have a really strong preference for logic, right? It almost seems sometimes that he carries around intuition a lot, right? And he wields it. So like I'm thinking now that, you know, it's not like I'm rearranging like the idea of ESTJ and ENTJ, but it's interesting how two types like those two, because they're both leading in extroverted thinking, they have that power, you know?
Right.
And, you know, as we were talking earlier today, I'm like, you know, you could be an ESTJ or an ENTJ because, you know, your logic is very prevalent, right? And it comes off in a way that reminds me a lot of, you know, N types when it comes to intuition. And so it was interesting upon further analysis in this video that, you know, there's a huge differentiation between both two types, you know, and that's interesting to me. What did you think about that?
And I can see, yeah, oh, sorry, there you go. And I can see, I mean, you're doing pretty good with ENTJ and
ESTJ.
ESP.
The audio's cut out. Matteo, can you move it a little more?
Yeah. Good, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, it was the ENTJ and the ESTJ.
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of like I like that a lot. And how you broke it up kind of made it a little bit more. I guess it made a little bit more sense. You kind of broke it down in a good layman's term, where it's the same thing with me, where sometimes too many details. I don't need the details. Give me the spark notes. Just get to the point, and like it kind of abridged it a little bit to the point where you kind of get a better understanding. And I can see by putting it next to like Bill O'Reilly, you kind of get that whole temperament. And you see how like. I think that quote's it's a great quote. I think that like I could see how he's saying, and like, you know, weapons are facts. It comes down to it, and like you can see how the temperament thing. So no, I liked it a lot. I got a good little insight. What about you, Nick?
To take what you know, and not really necessarily absolutely choose a type on day one. You know.
Yeah.
And to really just kind of look at your dynamic and kind of observe. You know, when I naturally, like I said, when I naturally read my description, way back when I first started studying typology, I definitely was aware of the Barnum effect, and I was like, okay, this is an astrology thing, right? That's kind of what, I mean, it sounded exactly like me. I was like, wow, this is astrology, but it sounds exactly like me. So I was like, okay, I want to look more into this. So I started taking it all in and really understanding how it works, you know, and I could see little pieces of all the types, just like I can see little pieces of all the Enneagram in my own personality. You can see those things, and you see how those things are actually operating, and you go, okay, here's the deal. I see what's going on. And that's where, to me, it was like, okay, I'm aware of this effect. I'm aware of the fact that I can just confirm different variations of type. And, you know, I never really struggled with finding a type per se. It was never really a challenge for me. But a lot of people do. And it's a challenge for a lot of people because they see both sides in their personality. And really identifying that preference is not easy. Sometimes you were forced to develop a function for a long period of time because the other one was repressed. And so that's why I don't really recommend even looking at it from a function point, but looking at it from a preference pair point. And we got to stop biasing sensing. That's the biggest problem I see in the Myers-Briggs community right now, is the bias of sensing against sensing. And it's like, oh, people are stupid and they're superficial and all that. You know what? I've known some incredibly intelligent people who prefer sensing. In fact, I actually envy them in certain ways. Like, sometimes I wish I didn't have to follow my insights as much as I follow them, but they're so compelling to me that I feel like I have to. But
I think a big part of it is that there's so many sensing types that they can just get mistaken for the general population, which probably is stupid.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the issue. But the general population, we got to remember, is a mixture of all the types. And it's like you still have idiot NFs, you have idiot NJs, you have idiot NTs, you have idiot SJs, you have idiots everywhere, regardless of type, because type is just preferential. It's not about strengths, right? You know, I've met a lot of people in my life, and I've met a lot of TJs, and I've met a lot of, you know, FPs, and, you know, I've met incredibly intelligent FPs, and I've met incredibly stupid NTs. I mean, and there's no variation of it. Now, again, the temperament is rational, which means they're trying to make reason, but if their IQ is the limiting factor, then that's a problem. You know? And, you know, you can still have a preference for certain facets and understand that, okay, I have a preference for NT, but I'm still an idiot. At the end of the day, I'm still an idiot. You know, and if you can come to that point of self-acceptance, you've done a great job in your own development. You know, admitting that. And as I get older, I start to recognize where I fall short. Like I said, and it's about building the team of people who balance out my particular weaknesses, especially in the sense of feeling. And now it's starting to come to my awareness that I've completely ignored Nick for the longest period of time. And see, now with hindsight, I'm going, oh, crap. And so where Daniel, who prefers FP, is going like, hey, what's up, man? Why are we ignoring Nick? Right? But he doesn't want to say anything because he doesn't want to be rude to me. So that's where Daniel may be conflicted right now. He may be stressing on the inside about me looking for the airtime.
I've been stressing.
So it's important that we make sure that we recognize this. And if I weren't aware of that, and I weren't aware of how my inferior feeling function operates, then I wouldn't be aware of those two particular things. Actually, I'd be hindsight. Maybe I'm just mean. Maybe I'm an asshole. Whatever my particular perspective is at the time, I could rationalize it. But now I don't rationalize, and I realize I fell short in this area. So, Nick, does any of this conversation resonate with you in particular?
I think the thing that most resonated with me is what Trey was saying about kind of getting lost in your own head in a way, and one thought leading into another thought, and I kind of feel like I'm in my own head a lot, and I kind of even say, like, right now I'm with a group of people, and I feel like sometimes I take in more what people are saying, and I am in my head thinking about that, and I'm not really vocalizing anything, and then people feel like I'm not involved in the conversation, but I'm actually, you know, fully involved. I'm just not expressing what I'm thinking, you know?
Yeah, like, I knew you were here this whole time.
Okay. Somebody cut out. Who was talking?
And
It's a lot.
I feel like part of that might just be the fact of, I feel like sometimes if I say the wrong thing and someone gets upset, to me it's better not to say anything at all, in a way. And I feel like I kind of sometimes live in a shell, and I need to break out of that and just say what I'm thinking and accept the consequences of whatever that is.
Yeah. And your what's your inner world like? I'm very curious. What really are you thinking about?
I mean, honestly, I don't, like, it's hard for me to stay on one topic for a long period of time. I I was just talking about this with my mom, actually. She was saying, you know, you don't really stick with things for a long time. Like, I'll be interested, I'll be fascinated with something for a little while, and then it'll go to something else, and I won't even think about that anymore. You know, it's just, I feel like I'm kind of, in a sense, all over the place with my thinking, and I never really, you know, I need to get more on track of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's interesting is if you do prefer ISTP, I would encourage you to further explore it. You know,
I'm definitely going to, yeah.
You and Matteo to further explore it, to really dive in, get rid of the stereotypes, get rid of the biases. As new people to MBTI, it's very easy to follow stereotypes, and also it's also very easy to follow desires. Like, is this the image I want to portray, so therefore that's what I am? Or is that what I actually am? Right? We've got to make sure that we recognize those things and be honest with ourselves. Otherwise, the tool's not going to help us. But what's interesting, what I was going to say was that you and Trey and Daniel all share the same quadra, I believe. Yes, you all share the same quadra, which means that you and Trey sound a lot alike in that way. You see what I mean? Like you said, I resonate with Trey. Like that's what you said. Because of how he explained it. Now, naturally, he prefers introversion, so you resonate with that aspect too. But he has the same function.
I have introverted thinking as well.
Yeah. So if introverted thinking being an ISTP's dominant function, introverted thinking being the INFJ's tertiary function, and then for Daniel, it's his inferior function. So you all share the same functional. Now, on the other hand, Matteo, if he prefers ENTJ, him and I are in the same quadrant. If he prefers ESTJ, he's in, I believe it's the alpha quadrant. So that's a different aspect. He'll be in a different quadrant. So there'll be a lot of differences there. Now, naturally, him and I are going to appear very similar on the surface. We are going to extrovert the same if he prefers either ESTJ or ENTJ because we have the same dominant function. Our perception will be different, the way that we perceive things, but that's what we're extroverting. That a lot of information, facts, data, well, it just spits out like crazy, right? It's just going boom, 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 and that's you'll see that side of our personalities. We're like, okay, that must be an ENTJ, but we also got to realize that we can't jump to conclusion. And we have to let the person come to their own conclusion on what their type preference is, you know. And we don't want to also. This is a message for anybody watching this video as well. It would be better served. And you'd be better serving your friendships if you helped them in the way of finding their type by providing them information, but not biasing it, because you may not like sensing people, and therefore you're going to try to persuade your friend not to prefer sensing. All this done subconsciously, of course.
Yeah.
You may not like perceiving, and you may go, you know what, you're not a perceiver because we're friends, and subconsciously, and you may bias the language. And in a particular way, even who has formal training in being a master practitioner, even myself, I still inject bias as a little bit here and there, and I try not to because I was trained not to. I did a lot of continuing ed to try to remove it in my language when I'm actually walking someone through a type process, and yet I still hear myself throwing out biases, and then I have to backtrack and go, I shouldn't have said that, or I said that wrong. Let me correct myself, and making sure that I'm not presenting those biases as much as possible, because we all have them. You know, this particular path over this, I prefer this over that. And I'm trying to remove those stereotypes because honestly, every type is very important. Every type has their own beautiful area to add to the world. They have their own beautiful skill set to add. And if we can learn to appreciate that type, and we can to kind of help people give the information and also tell them, hey, I recognize this function. That was pretty cool that you used this function. It was pretty cool that you used this function. I saw you stretch to this angle really quickly. Right? So, and, you know, that was really cool how you use that. I want to learn how to further develop that function or whatever you're demonstrating. You know, now if you're seeing that function all the time, it's clear as a friend to say, hey, you're using SE a lot. Are you sure about your type preference? And they go, yeah, I'm sure. Then let it go. It's their journey. It's not your journey. It's not your place to tell them what the hell they are. Right? You know, that's where we're at with this MBTV's going. And as far as the Myers-Briggs aspect goes, it's not your place. You know, who do you know? How do you know if I love this metaphor. How do you know if I prefer Chinese food or Mexican food? Just because you see sandwiches all the time.
Yeah.
How do you know?
Yeah.
You know, see, for example, I naturally may think Daniel loves Chinese food the most. This guy is always eating Chinese. But the real question is, here's the real deal. Is it because he can't afford the real food he likes? No, it's not a diss. It's not a diss. Let's think about it. These are variables that actually come into play. Maybe he actually likes ribs, but ribs are expensive. They're like $20 a rack, right? So he cheapens down to something that's more realistic for someone who's 23, 24 years old on average, and he decides to settle with Chinese food, you know? And so naturally, I may think he loves Chinese food, but in reality, circumstances have prevented him from using his preferred method or eating his preferred food. This is how cognition works. If you put me in a job which like accounting, what do you think I'm going to be using? Intuition or sensing? In accounting.
I mean, it's all database.
It's going to be sensing. It's going to be the preferred function for accounting. So if I'm an accountant for 10 years, how good do you think my sensing is? How well do you think it's going to be developed, right?
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah, very well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just natural to make job. Why do I wear a stupid skinny tie and walk into work and look like a moron while I'm sitting behind a computer? It makes no sense. I should be wearing pajamas. But you know, I may have that thought. I may hate the job, but the idea is I will be building sensing in the process. And yeah, maybe intuition will show its head once in a while, but the idea is that I'll be using sensing so much that that function will look like it's preferred, but in reality, I still prefer intuition. Just like Daniel may actually like ribs, or he may like the $100 restaurant down the street. We don't know, right? Circumstances had it to where he prefers Chinese food, looks like he prefers Chinese food, but in reality, he might not. He might just settle for Chinese food. It's like the common question of, why do dogs love bones? The answer is dogs don't love bones. Dogs settle for bones. Dogs love meat. Put a bone next to a piece of meat. What are they going to go after?
Meat.
Yeah, it's a given, right? Oh, but so dogs don't love bones, right? I'm going off on a tangent. This is all irrelevant. Let's get back to the point here. So that being said, that's how cognitive functions work in the psyche, and understand that we can't look at somebody and say that's what you prefer. That's just stupid. You know, unless I tell you specifically, hey, I prefer this. Think about the shy extrovert. What do they look like? Let's say they had a traumatic past and they're terrified of people, but they're actually extroverted. And it's a real thing, right? You have people who prefer extroversion, who want to be around people, and they're shy. That's a real thing. Then you have people who are very bold and courageous, introverted preference. And you're like, wow, that person must love extroversion. And in reality, at the end of the day, they're like, oh, crap, that was so miserable. I had to deal with all these people all day long, and it was just, I'm drained. But you don't see that side. All you see is what they present, right? If we look at the painting, you know, the Son of Man, it's a good representation of that. What we see is this thing in front of us. What is that in front of us? It's the apple, but the face is missing, right? So that's the side of what we're presenting to the world may not actually be what we prefer in this sense. And that's what makes typology so interesting to me. So, all right, so Daniel, take this, or anybody questions, go ahead, because
I was just gonna ask, where does the whole like out of sight, out of mind thing fall into play with this? Does that have anything to do with this mentality? Because I feel like that's a big part of me, you know. I feel like if something isn't right in front of me and it's not, you know, I feel like I can just put it in the back of my head and not think about it, even if it's a person, you know, even if, like he was saying, he's very, like, him and I clash in the way of we might make plans, and then just because I'm not with him or not thinking about it, I might end up doing something else, and then he's going to get mad at me because, and this happens, I'm not just making this up, you know, he gets mad at me. He gets mad at me because I end up doing something else, but I feel like it's just because, you know, I'm not.
I wouldn't care if you give me a heads up.
Yeah.
Like, I go, fuck, you're just messing with my time now, and then that's just fucking up my schedule.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have shit to do. I'm not going to wait on you. Yeah. Like, I don't like having to have someone, like, have to rely on someone for my schedule personally.
But sometimes I feel like it's just out of my mind, and it's not something, you know, I don't know. What do you think about all that?
Okay, so there's a lot of factors that come into play with that. Number one is you have memory. memory is a big factor. Memory is unrelated to cognitive function. A lot of people pair it with SI, but in reality, no. Okay, memory is memory recall and memory storing, and that's actually a different brain function. How you store memories. The other part of it has to do with prioritization. How important is that particular thing to you? Because I guarantee you, if I go, hey, Nick, I'm going to point a gun and I'm going to shoot your favorite person in the world if you don't do this task in the next 24 hours, what's going to be on your mind?
Doing that task in the next 24 hours.
So you get where I'm coming from, right? So it's
probably like the next 5 hours. Yeah.
You get where I'm coming from. It has to do with prioritization, right? It has to do with how important that particular thing is, and then we can root that back to what your values are. Now we can tie it to a function. Does that particular task, whatever it may be, support your values? And if it does, then you might be more apt to put it higher on your priority list. If it doesn't, you're going to probably drop it on your priority list.
So it's funny that you say that, because most of the time I'm bailing on him when he's asking me to go to the gym with him, and that's not something. That's not. That's exactly it. That's not something high on my priority list for myself. And yeah. But that's hitting the nail on the head right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can look at this from a lot of different angles. But like I said, there's a lot of factors that come into play. If you have a memory issue, like I can't remember, like legitimately, then that's one thing. But I guarantee you're going to remember the gun pointing at your friend.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have a hole in your head. That's my fault. My bad. Out of mind. What do I do?
What happened yesterday? Why are you thinking about it?
You get where I'm coming from. It's like you have those angles where you can see that actually come into play, but you have those other aspects too. So we got to remember, like I said in the beginning, make sure we understand cognitive function theory for what it is, and let's not make it what it's not, which is memory and also prioritization, also how we develop values, right? How do we store those values? What values are important to us? That's FI. That's a function, but you can go, okay. We can look at things, but let's keep it where it is. If we understand that Myers-Briggs, essentially the theory behind it, understands how we take in information, how we make decisions or come to conclusions, how we approach the outer world, and our preferred way of directing and receiving energy. That's all it is. Beyond that, let's not make it to like, oh, you know what? I direct energy through, FI, through SE, through NI, through TE, so therefore I love James Bond. What? That's not how it works. It's not meant for that. It's not about your personality of things that you like. So Kiersey boiled it down to temperament, and he boiled it down to your character, right? Temperament and character. And those things create your personality. Your character comes from a totally different thing. So in other words, if we did, in other ways of explaining this, if we didn't put this into perspective and realize that, okay, you have a personality trait this way, yet that would assume, and that would be under the assumption that, hey, we're all ENTJs will get along, right? And we know that's not true, right? Because if all ENTJs got along, there'd be a country called ENTJ. You know that. That's what would happen. And all the ESTPs would be, in that one country. And then one country will be like, hey, we need to recruit these ESP. Let's sign them up as mercenaries. And I can make this whole scenario. You know what? I'm not going to draw the story out. I was going to make a big story, but I decided just to skip it.
I saw where you're going.
But so that's the idea.
Speaking of Chinese, I'm eating Chinese food right now.
Yeah. Matteo checked out. Is what.
Also to you, props.
Matteo, did you check out?
No, I'm sorry. I have something to drink.
Yeah. Okay.
You literally take these all the time. If you're gonna start burning them for me, I expect a 6-pack of these. Go ahead, go crazy.
I will get you a 6-pack of these.
Around 3 liters.
Yeah.
In the perspective of beer. So Daniel, that means thoughts. So Daniel, what are you thinking right now? Because you're rubbing your beard.
Yeah, this means I'm thinking. I'm really assembling. If I'm gonna go back to that intuition.
Can you move on?
I'm not getting money.
No.
I'm okay with you today.
So the idea, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the idea, the reference you had about intuition from before, or what Trey was talking about. You know, this whole time I was really just kind of putting together that picture.
Okay.
And you know, it's interesting because, like, you know, obviously these are very insightful live sessions, but I feel like, you know, between Nick and Matteo, I feel like they're really getting a glimpse of the different dimensions of type, like putting functions aside, right? Sticking to like the core typology and its practical applications, right? Like, I have no idea what Matteo is thinking about, how he's seeing the world with what you're saying, or even what Nick's thinking, because it's all introverted. But for me, it's like, wow, I totally understand how not only are these types are different, but they prefer different things. And you know, and how these types use all these different functions, and the practicality of just sticking with the simplicity of the Myers-Briggs in itself, right?
Right.
You know, like beginning of today, Nick didn't know anything about Myers-Briggs, and with your history lesson, you know, about Chinese food, I think we all kind of got a better idea.
I think that's a very good. That was very good. Analogy. I'll give you that one.
And just so you know, I do prefer Chinese food. Okay, I do prefer Chinese food.
Hey, it's just an example to draw.
I prefer beef, but
Somebody didn't move the computer. I wish I would have got that joke because I didn't hear it.
I said I prefer Kobe beef, but I'm kind of stuck with skirt steak right now.
Yeah.
I prefer Kobe beef. You know Kobe beef?
Oh, Kobe beef?
Yeah. I'm saying I prefer Kobe beef, but I'm stuck with skirt steak at the time being.
That's my point. Right there. That's my point. Exactly.
No.
Loves Kobe beef, but he's stuck with skirt steak. That's an example. Like, okay, you see him eating skirt steak, you go, he must prefer skirt steak because he eats it all the time. You know what? No, he eats skirt steak because he loves Kobe beef, but he can't afford Kobe beef all the time because that's a ridiculously expensive piece of meat.
Well worth it. Well, yeah, it's well worth it. I kind of dumb it down. I go to filet mignon instead weekly. I wish I could do Kobe, but not there yet.
Yeah, exactly, and he'll get there. I mean, he's gonna make it happen. There's no question. Someday I'm gonna run into him, and I'm gonna run into him at a steakhouse, and that's what I'm gonna see him eating. And I'm like, hey, Kobe beef, right? And he's like, yeah, how'd you know? And I'm like, I know. I remember you mentioning this. This day was gonna come, and now it happened.
This is bound to happen.
Yeah.
And now we're here at Peter Luger's with some Kobe beef.
Yeah, I predicted the future. All right. So that being said, guys, any questions on what we covered today? We've extended this live show for quite some time. I want to make sure that we get everything covered, and we got any questions about anything. I'm going to be checking the YouTube channel now and making sure there's no questions on there. If there are questions, guys, please post it. And I want to make sure I address those. So in the meantime, you guys, if you have any questions for me or Trey, which we can cover that. So let's kind of go into that area.
Yeah, Trey. So I kind of want to hear from you a little bit more of the Enneagram. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
The Enneagram. I kind of want to learn, like, he kind of just briefly went into it, how, like, you have your type, and how you have your wing, but then there's also how you can vary like 3 different, you know, your specific number is going to go here, and then it's also, you know, then you have the ones right next to you. So I definitely like a little bit more clarification on this.
All right, yeah. So basically, when it comes to Enneagram, it's all about you have 9 different types, 9 different core types, right? And you only have one of them. Yeah, no. He came in one day and he saw the Enneagram on my computer, and it looks like a pentagram. So no, but Enneagram is all about, you have 9 different types, and those 9 different types, you have one of them, right? So you have one core type, and you can have other variations of type. You aren't just one. It's similar to MBTI in that way. You kind of have all the functions. You're just one specific type. But when it comes to Enneagram, it's more about personal experience. It's all about it's all about what experiences you were put in early in childhood development. And it really shows you which parts of the world you can see. And so, like, for example, you have a type 2, a type 5, and a type 8. Actually, I'm just going to use 2 and 8. So 8 is more about dominance and control and influence. And so a type 8 compared to a type 2, which is type 2 is all about helping and contributing to others. It's really like a type 8 might not see that they need to swoop in and save somebody. You know what I mean? Like, but a type 2 may see that. A type 2 won't see when someone is taking over control, right? But a type 8 would see that. And so it really affects the way you see the world, what parts of the world you see, a lot of your actions, the things you care about. These are actually at the core, each type is just basic desire and basic fear, right? And those come from your wounds as a child, as something that you had to deal with. So I'll just give you an example. My core type is type 5, and it's they're very in their heads because they felt they were intruded on when they were younger. And that's just the thing, is I had no privacy when I was a kid. So everything was all up in my business, and everything I did was analyzed to death. But the thing is, there's 3 different, the Enneagram actually cuts into 3 different parts. You have the heart triad, the head triad, and the instinct triad. And so what happens is, in these 3 different groups, you have 3 different types. And so you have one of each. And so I'm in the head triad, and I have type 5, but I also have one in the heart and in the instincts. So each of these have their own childhood wounds, their own basic fears, and their own basic desires. So for me, I'm a 5-1-2. So 5 is all about having intrusive parents. The 1 is all about never being necessarily good enough, and the 2 is all about feeling that their needs are selfish. And this causes their what they're trying to achieve in a way. Like they have a basic desire, and so they want to achieve that desire, but they're also afraid at the same time of not having something or something of the sort. It's almost the same thing. Like you read the basic fear, and it's like they're afraid of this, but the basic desire is this. It's like the same thing, it's just flipped. And so when it comes to the different types, you actually have a variation of your core type. So I'm a type 5 at my core, but I also have 6 and 4, which are right next to 5. And one of those is what I'm going to lean towards. I'm a 5-wing 4. And so I lean more towards an emotional side as an intellectual type, right? As a type 5, being the intellectual type. I'm swaying towards the emotional side on that spectrum. So when it comes to all of that put together, you really get a good sense of what I've had to deal with, or what I dealt with early in childhood, and what that's caused in my personality. And what's really interesting is that MBTI covers a little bit of personal experiences, but it's more focused on nature. Yeah. And then the Enneagram is more focused on nurture. So it's really cool when you combine them together. And they're actually really essential for each other, because a lot of times people will look at an ENTJ and say, oh, you're doing this, so you're not ENTJ. And that's technically not how it works. An ENTJ can be doing something an ESFJ can be doing something out of preference because they were forced to. So they may look like an ENTJ. Their environment may have affected them to look like one, but it's not what they prefer to do. And so that's what type is. But then for Enneagram, it's all about, but you're born with your MBTI type. You don't change your MBTI type. But then for Enneagram, it's something that your
environment plays a role in.
Yeah, a huge role in your type. So it's really interesting when you get all of it together. Like just knowing your core type and your wing is really awesome. But once you get your tri-type, they have tri-type descriptions online, and they're all right. But and the thing is, they're really cool, because if you get the right tri-type, you're not going to disagree with anything. From what I've found, at least, right? Most of the time when people find their tri-type, there's not a single thing they disagree with on the list and the description. And that was definitely true for me, and I think it was true for Daniel as well, and Damon. And so when you, I bounced around the tri-types for a while, which is, the tri-type, by the way, is the name for the 3 of them put together. And I actually bounced around for a long time. I thought I was this tri-type. I thought I was that tri-type. But then when I actually found my tri-type, I was like, no, this is it for sure. Like, I'm not going back on this one. And I mean, I might have said that before, but like, I didn't feel it like this one. You know what I mean? It wasn't it didn't click the same. And you'll know when you get your right tri-type. You're like, yeah, this is me for sure. And so it's really interesting to see how much that plays a role. And for example, I was a 512, and when I read the description, my dad was like, it says trying to fit in. I don't see you as someone who tries to fit in. I always see that you're trying to be different and not fit in, you know, stand out. And I said, yeah, it's interesting. I was like, because I have 5 wing 4, right? So the wing 4 contributes to that. And it says, all right, no, wing 4 wants to be unique or different, right? They want to have a different identity that's not like what they're seeing around them. And so it makes it look like I'm not trying to fit in because I want to be so different, but I'm being different to fit in. You see what I mean? So it's really interesting, the dynamic of everything. It's a whole different world. Like for each person, you read their tri-type, you can kind of get a sense of what they're seeing that you're not seeing. It's really interesting.
Okay, no. He broke it down perfectly. No. Now I have a better understanding. Now I got more of a. Now I'm a little bit more curious on myself personally.
What'd you say?
Now I'm personally like you broke it down like a good, easy way where I can kind of like grab it. Now like I'm kind of more interested in kind of figuring out like what in my life has caused me to have like now I want to know my tri-type. Yeah. Now I'm thinking in my head like what could have caused to be in this sense. Like now you know now you got me thinking. Got that just kicking a little bit.
Yeah, Enneagram is amazing. Like when I found Enneagram, I was thoroughly impressed. I didn't actually think it was that cool in the beginning. But then when I started getting into it and understanding the theory a bit better, I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like this just, you know what I mean? Like this, like when I read mine, it was something I do naturally. It really showed me who I was in a sense, because there's things that you try to do in the world because everyone's like, oh, you need to do that and you need to do this. But when I found my tri-type and I read it, it was all the times that I felt bad maybe for doing what I would like to do instead of what society places on me. You know what I mean? Like for me, I'm always thinking, I'm always in my head, I'm always coming up with ideals and morals and then giving those to others as a way of helping and like giving, it's almost like a solution, but it's more about a moral that they can adopt to fix their issue. See what I mean? And I would do that a lot with friends. Like I would mentor a lot of my friends, and that's actually the name of the 512 is the mentor. And I always seem to take a mentor position for most of my friends. And so I always wondered like, you know, why do I always end up in this position? And it seemed interesting because reading Enneagram, it was like, yeah, I find myself doing that a lot. Like I always feel like it's wrong or something. You know what I mean? Because like I'm supposed to be doing this work or that or this. And really, if I were able to live my life just doing the way that I am supposed to be, I wouldn't have to worry about that stuff. You know what I mean? It would just come naturally, and I'd get paid for it, which would be ideal. But that's the idea of tri-type for me, and what it's really shown me is like I found my tri-type and thought, wow, that's what I'm supposed to be living life like. I just have to figure out how to make it happen so that I can live life in that way and not have to worry about money and all this other stuff that I normally have to worry about. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you have any thoughts on
I mean, at this point, I kind of just want to learn more and take in more and, learn more about myself and what my tri-type is.
Yeah. Hey, can you hear me?
What'd you say?
I said, can you hear Nick?
I didn't hear you. I apologize.
Oh, maybe you can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just saying that from what you were saying, it makes me want to look more into it and see what my tri-type is.
I'm sorry, it's coming out again. It's weird. It'll sound okay for one moment.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I was just saying that I want to figure out what my tri-type is and, learn more about myself through that, and hopefully it can better myself because I'm kind of not in the greatest of spots right now.
Yeah, I understand for sure. I definitely recommend Enneagram and MBTI because both of them are about both of them are about your preferences, because it's almost like you can't choose your Enneagram, you can't choose your MBTI type. You know what I mean? those are both kind of handed to you, one through life circumstance and one through birth. So how that affects your life, it'll depend. And depending on what types you get. But the thing is, what is it that, hold on really quick. Anyways, so point is, when it comes to Enneagram type and MBTI type, it's really helpful because for MBTI, you may be acting out of preference. You may be acting a certain way because of your environment. But if you can really crack down on what it is you prefer to do versus what you're forced to do, it's really helpful. And then with Enneagram, it kind of gives you a perspective as to who you are. You know what I mean? It's just a lot of times we get caught up with the things around us that seem to distract us quite a bit. And Enneagram, at least for me, really showed me where I prefer how I prefer to do life. And it's just hard to distinguish a lot of times between what everyone tells you your life should be like and what you actually would prefer your life to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's definitely at least the way I was brought up and, the way my parents taught me is that there's they wanted me to go to college and get a job and, kind of live an everyday life. But I was in college. I went away to college and I did that for a couple of years and it just wasn't what I was feeling at the time. And now I feel like because of that and because of what they tell me, I kind of lost right now. But I don't know. I feel like I just need to stop worrying about what everyone else is thinking so much and start focusing on what I need to do.
Yeah. I think that, we can set up a call some other time. We can try to work with your Enneagram if you'd like.
Yeah.
All right,
but
I do want to start getting ready to wrap this all up. We've had a lot of topics to cover. We went over a lot of things. Matteo has disappeared from reality. There we go. So if you guys have any questions, like I said, we can clear those up real quick. If not, we're gonna wrap this call up and make sure that we proceed and we don't suck up all the rest of the audience's life. So
a good 2 hours of their life. Thanks for 2 hours in the audience.
That being said, do you guys have anything to add? Any last questions, comments, or things that you want to clear up?
No, it's very good. No. I love everything about it.
I mean, I could probably keep going for a while, but not right now. Another time.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is MBTV, and we've had great guests today. It was a great call. We appreciate you, the audience, coming on, and you guys chatting. Very entertaining chat, and very interesting comments on the chat. So I appreciate you guys really making it live, making it cracking on the chat. That's always fun. Anyway, that being said, you guys take care. Make sure if you want to continue conversation, join on Slack. Slack's a great place to continue those conversations. If you're new to the chat on this YouTube, take the conversation over to the Slack chat, get involved in the community, and you guys can start interacting constantly instead of just on the live streams. I'll always come and join us on the live streams as well, of course, but make sure you transfer it over to Slack. And Janelle, I know you fired yourself from Slack, but the point is, if other people who want to go on Slack, feel free. That being said, appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.